6 months of silence, not a single text, not one email, not even a cold professional nod on LinkedIn. Victoria, my former boss, the woman I had spent 2 years working beside, late nights reviewing contracts, early mornings sharing coffee in fluorescent-lit conference rooms, had erased me from her life the moment I handed in my resignation. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it was just business. But some nights, sitting alone in my apartment with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator for company, my jaw would tighten and my chest would ache with a question I couldn't answer. What did I do wrong? Then came that Thursday evening. Rain hammered the windows. The city outside looked like smeared watercolor, all blurred headlights and gray streaks. I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when 3 sharp knocks hit my door. I opened it, and standing there drenched, rain sliding down her fair skin, her long dark brown waves clinging to her shoulders, was a woman I barely recognized. Curves that commanded attention, a slim waist flowing into full hips, a figure wrapped in a soaked trench coat. Victoria's younger sister, Alina, and what she said next changed everything. She didn't wait for me to speak. Alina stepped inside my apartment like she had already rehearsed this moment 100 times, leaving small puddles of rainwater on my hardwood floor. She pushed her dark wavy hair back from her face with one hand, her chest rising and falling quickly. Not from the cold, I realized, but from nerves. I stood there holding the door open like an idiot. "Close it," she said quietly. I did. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I watched her scan my apartment, the stack of folders on the kitchen counter, the half-empty coffee mug on the side table, the single dim lamp casting warm light across the room. She seemed to be calculating something, measuring something. "You're Lucas," she finally said, turning to face me. "Last time I checked." I replied carefully. Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but close. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone, setting it face up on my kitchen counter without explanation. On the screen was a photograph, Victoria and a man I didn't recognize, laughing at what looked like a company dinner. Recent, judging by the venue. I looked at Elena. "What is this?" My sister, she said simply, "has been telling our entire family that she ended things with her last relationship because of you. That you made her life at work unbearable. That you were the reason she lost focus." Her jaw tightened slightly. "She's been painting herself as the victim for 6 months, and our parents believe every word." The ache in my chest shifted into something sharper. "That's not what happened," I said. "I know," Elena replied, and the certainty in her voice surprised me. "I know it's not. Because I know my sister." She picked up her phone and slid it back into her pocket. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and the expression on her face was so direct, so unflinching, that I felt something shift in the room. "I need your help," she said. "What kind of help?" She took a single step closer, close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume cutting through the smell of rain. Something warm, something floral. Her dark waves were still damp, her fair skin carrying the faint flush of someone who had walked through cold wind. And she looked up at me with those steady, serious eyes. Then she whispered it. "Kiss me." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Not right now," she clarified, and the ghost of a smile finally broke through. "I mean, pretend to be with me, my boyfriend, in front of my family." She paused. "In front of Victoria." I stared at her. "You want to use me," I said slowly, "to provoke your sister." "I want to correct a story," she said firmly. "There's a family dinner in 3 weeks. Victoria will be there, my parents will be there. And right now I'm the only one who doesn't believe her version of events." She held my gaze without flinching. "I need someone on my side who knows the truth, someone Victoria can't easily dismiss." The rain outside intensified, drumming against the glass. I should have said no. Every logical part of my brain was forming the word, shaping it, preparing to deliver it politely but firmly. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Why me?" And Elena tilted her head just slightly and said something I wasn't prepared for. "Because," she said quietly, "you're the only person in this story who actually got hurt." The room went very still, and I realized I had absolutely no idea what I was about to agree to. We agreed to meet 3 times before the dinner. That was the plan. 3 casual outings, coffee, a walk, maybe lunch. Just enough to build a believable story if Victoria or anyone in the family started asking questions. Elena was practical about it. She sat across from me at my kitchen table that same rainy night, pulled out her phone, and started listing logistics like she was organizing a project timeline. I watched her and thought, she's definitely related to Victoria. We need a how we met story, she said, not looking up from her notes. We met because you showed up at my apartment soaking wet, I said. She looked up. That's not romantic. It's memorable. She stared at me for exactly 2 seconds, then looked back down at her phone. But I caught it, the smallest twitch at the corner of her mouth. That was the first time I made Elena almost smile. I decided immediately that I wanted to do it again. The first meeting was coffee. A small cafe 3 blocks from my apartment. Morning light pouring through wide windows, the smell of espresso thick in the air. Elena arrived exactly on time, dark wavy hair loose over her shoulders, wearing a simple cream blouse that somehow made her look effortlessly put together. She slid into the seat across from me and picked up the menu like she'd been here 1,000 times. You're already comfortable, I observed. I'm always comfortable, she replied without looking up. It's other people who get nervous. Am I making you nervous? I asked. She lowered the menu just enough to look at me over the top of it. You're making me reconsider the croissant. I laughed. A real one, the kind that catches you off guard. And something about that moment loosened the tightness I'd been carrying in my shoulders for 6 months. We talked. First carefully, rehearsed answers, coordinated details about how we supposedly met, what our early dates looked like. But somewhere between the second coffee and the plate of shared pastries neither of us had planned to order, the rehearsal dissolved. She told me about her work. She designed interiors for commercial spaces. Hotels mostly, and her eyes changed when she talked about it. Brighter, faster, you actually love it, I said. Why do you sound surprised? Most people talk about their jobs like a legal obligation. She tilted her head, studying me. What do you talk about like that? I thought about it honestly. Mornings, I said, before coffee. She smiled, a full one this time, and it did something to the light in the room. The second meeting was a walk along the Riverside Park on a Saturday afternoon. Golden hour light stretched across the water. Elena wore a caramel-colored coat that cinched at her waist, her dark waves catching the breeze, and I noticed, not for the first time, how she moved through the world, unhurried. Certain at some point our arms brushed as we walked, neither of us moved away. Can I ask you something honest, I said. You can ask, she replied carefully. I'll decide about honest. I smiled at that. Fair enough. I paused. Do you actually think this will work? The dinner, Victoria. Elena was quiet for a moment. The river moved beside us, slow and silver in the fading light. I think, she said slowly, that it started as a plan. She glanced at me sideways. I'm less sure what it is now. The words hung between us warm and unresolved, and I felt the ground shift, just slightly, beneath my feet. The third meeting wasn't planned. It was a Tuesday evening and I was at the small Italian restaurant 2 streets from my office, waiting on a takeout order when my phone buzzed. Elena, where are you right now? I smiled before I could stop myself. Me about to have a very sad solo dinner, you? Elena defined sad, me plastic fork, paper bag, no conversation, 3 seconds past Elena address. She arrived 11 minutes later, still in her work clothes, a fitted charcoal blazer over a deep burgundy dress, her dark wavy hair pinned loosely at one side, a few strands falling across her fair skin. She looked like she had walked out of somewhere important and hadn't quite decided to stop moving yet. She slid into the seat across from me without asking. You didn't have to come, I said. I was nearby, she replied, picking up the paper menu like it was a leather-bound wine list. You were nearby, I repeated slowly. She looked up, those steady eyes. Don't make it a thing, Lucas. I'm not making it a thing. Your face is making it a thing. I pressed my lips together to keep from grinning. My face is completely neutral. Your face, she said precisely, is doing exactly what it does when you think you've won something. I leaned back in my chair. You've been studying my face? She set the menu down and looked at me with an expression of magnificent patience. Order something. You look hungry. We stayed for 2 hours. The takeout order sat forgotten in its bag. We ordered actual food. Pasta for her. Grilled chicken for me, and somewhere between the bread basket and the second glass of water, the conversation stopped being careful. She told me about her family. Not the surface version. Not the rehearsed dinner table summary, but the real architecture of it. Her parents were traditional in the quiet, immovable way that doesn't announce itself but shapes everything. Victoria was the eldest, the accomplished one, the daughter who had built a career sharp enough to make everyone proud. And Elena, creative, independent, unconventional Elena, had spent years being quietly loved but subtly overlooked. "They don't mean to," she said, turning her water glass slowly between her hands. "That's the part that makes it complicated. They're not unkind people. They just have a very specific idea of what success looks like." "And you don't fit it," I said quietly. She looked at me, not with sadness exactly, with something more tired than sad. I fit a different version of it. I understood that more than she knew. "Victoria was my version," I said after a moment. "Not romantically, I mean professionally. She was the standard I was measuring myself against for 2 years. Every project, every late night, every presentation." I paused. And when I finally left, when I finally decided I was worth more than the way that place made me feel, she just switched me off, like a light. The restaurant hummed softly around us. Someone laughed at a nearby table. Elena was watching me carefully, her dark eyes holding something quiet and attentive. "That must have hurt," she said, simply, without performance. "It did," I admitted, and the ease with which I said it surprised me. She nodded slowly, then looked down at her glass. "She does that, Victoria. She's very good at deciding when people are useful and when they're finished." A pause. "I've been on the receiving end of that too." Something passed between us then, not dramatic, not loud, just recognition. The quiet understanding of two people who had been shaped by the same difficult force, and were only now realizing they were sitting across from each other because of it. Her hand was resting on the table. Mine was close, not touching, but close. "Elena," I said quietly. She looked up. "I don't think this is pretend anymore." The words came out before I'd fully decided to say them, and the moment they landed, I watched something move across her face, a flicker of vulnerability. Raw and unguarded there and then carefully composed again. She didn't deny it, she didn't confirm it. She just looked at me with those dark, steady eyes and said, "The dinner is in 9 days, Lucas." And somehow that wasn't a no. But it also wasn't nearly enough. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me, are you Team Elena from the beginning? Because I think I was, and I just didn't know it yet. Don't forget to like this video. It genuinely helps more than you know. The days before the dinner moved differently. Time had a strange weight to it, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy and electric, full of something that hadn't arrived yet. Elena and I texted every day, sometimes about logistics, sometimes about nothing at all. "Elena, what's your favorite thing about mornings now?" "Me. I thought I told you." "Nothing, Elena. Try again." I stared at my phone for a long moment, sitting on the edge of my bed, morning light flooding through the curtains in luminous golden sheets. "Me. Checking if you've texted." She didn't reply for 4 minutes. I counted every single one. "Elena. That's dangerously close to smooth, Lucas." "Me, I have my moments." "Elena, don't let it go to your head." "Me. Too late, 5 days before the dinner. She asked me to help her pick an outfit. I should clarify. She didn't frame it that way. She called it strategic coordination. We needed to look believable as a couple, she said. Our colors should complement each other. It was purely practical. I showed up at her apartment anyway. The space looked exactly like I imagined Elena's world would look. Warm tones, textured fabrics, carefully curated art prints on the walls, a drafting table by the window covered in sketches and fabric swatches. Everything intentional. Everything alive. She came out of her bedroom holding 2 dresses on hangers. The first was black. Elegant, structured, understated. The second was deep emerald green, flowing fabric, fitted waist. A neckline that was sophisticated without trying too hard. "Which one says I'm in a happy relationship and not at all doing this to make my sister reconsider her life choices?" she asked with a perfectly straight face. I looked at both dresses. Then I looked at her, standing there barefoot on the wooden floor, her long dark waves loose and slightly messy, her fair skin glowing in the soft afternoon light coming through the tall windows. "The green one," I said. "Why?" "Because," I said carefully, "you're already holding it closer to your body." She looked down. She was. Her fingers had unconsciously pressed the emerald fabric against her waist, the silk resting against her curves like it already belonged there. She looked back up at me, and something shifted in her eyes, something warm and startled and unprotected. "You notice things," she said quietly. "Only when they matter," I replied. The room went very still. Afternoon sunlight painted golden rectangles across the floor between us. Dust motes drifted slowly through the warm air. I could hear her breathing, steady but shallow. She turned away first, hanging the black dress back inside the closet. "You should wear navy," she said over her shoulder. "It'll look good next to green. Are you coordinating us?" "I'm coordinating the illusion," she said. And I could hear the smile she was hiding. That evening, we sat on her small balcony as the city turned gold beneath a setting sun. She had made tea, something herbal and warm that smelled like chamomile and honey. We sat side by side on mismatched chairs, our shoulders nearly touching, watching the rooftops glow. "Lucas," she said after a long silence. "Yeah. What happens after the dinner?" I turned to look at her. Her profile was lit by the last of the daylight, the curve of her jaw, the slope of her nose, the way her dark lashes cast tiny shadows across her cheekbones. "What do you want to happen?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She wrapped both hands around her mug and held it close to her chest. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that after the dinner, you won't have a reason to keep showing up." The words cracked something open inside my chest. I set my mug down. I turned toward her fully, and very slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. I reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were warm from the tea. They trembled, just once, before curling around mine. "Elena," I said softly, "you became the reason 3 meetings ago." She closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and catching the last golden light like liquid amber, neither of us let go. And in that moment, sitting on a tiny balcony above a glowing city, I understood something with absolute clarity. I was no longer pretending. I hadn't been for a while. The family dinner arrived like a closing curtain. We walked into my parents' old house together under a sky washed in full, luminous daylight, the kind that makes every color feel brighter and every truth feel heavier. Elena looked devastating in the emerald dress we had chosen, the fabric hugging her curvy hourglass figure, accentuating her slim waist, full bust, and wide hips with every step. Her long, dark brown waves fell loosely over her fair shoulders, catching the light like polished mahogany. I kept my hand at the small of her back, thumb brushing the silk, and she leaned into it just enough for me to feel her warmth through the material. "You're staring again," she whispered as we crossed the threshold. "Can you blame me?" I murmured back, keeping my voice low. "You look like you walked out of a painting I'm not allowed to touch." She gave me a sidelong glance, the corner of her mouth lifting in that way that always undid me. "Then maybe you should stop asking for permission." The flirtation landed soft and dangerous between us, a thread of heat that had grown thicker with every passing day. Even now, walking into the lion's den, we couldn't help ourselves. It had become our language, teasing that masked how deeply we had fallen. Inside, the table was already set. Victoria sat at the far end beside their parents, posture perfect, smile practiced. The moment her eyes landed on us, on my hand resting possessively at Elena's waist, the temperature in the room dropped. Dinner began with polite conversation that felt like walking across thin ice. Elena played her part beautifully, laughing at my quiet jokes, brushing her fingers against mine when she reached for her glass. At one point she leaned close under the pretense of passing the bread and whispered, "If you keep looking at me like that, they're going to think we're about to skip dessert for entirely different reasons." I nearly choked on my wine. "You're evil," I breathed. "Only on Tuesdays," she answered, eyes sparkling with mischief that quickly softened into something far more tender. Under the table, her fingers found mine and held on. That single touch carried every late-night conversation, every vulnerable confession we had shared. In that moment, I felt the depth of what we had built, not a scheme anymore, but a real breathing love that had snuck up on both of us and refused to let go. Then the ice broke. Victoria's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "So tell me, Lucas, how exactly did you manage to move on from being fired to dating my sister in under 6 months?" The table fell silent. I felt Elena's hand tighten in mine. Her fair skin had gone pale, the luminous daylight from the tall windows now highlighting the sudden tremble in her fingers. "I wasn't fired. said evenly. I resigned. Victoria stood slowly, her eyes flashing with something cold and wounded. That's not how I remember it. You were difficult, you undermined me at every turn, and now you're using my own sister to get back at me. Elena's voice came out steady but quiet. Victoria, stop. But her sister wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and laid it on the table between us. On the screen were screenshots, messages I had sent Elena weeks ago, the ones where we had first outlined the plan. My stomach dropped. I know everything, Victoria said, voice trembling with fury. One of my assistants saw the two of you at that riverside park. She recognized Lucas. I had her look into it. This was all a setup, wasn't it? A pathetic little revenge plot. The room spun. I could hear Elena's breathing change, shallow, uneven. Her long, wavy hair fell forward as she looked down at her plate, shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. The glamorous, confident woman who had whispered, "Kiss me" in my apartment was suddenly a daughter caught between family loyalty and the man she had come to love. Their mother's voice cracked. "Elena, is this true?" Elena lifted her head. Tears shimmered in her dark eyes but didn't fall. "It started that way," she admitted, voice raw. "But it's not anymore. What Lucas and I have now, it's real." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Real? He's using you the same way he tried to use me at the company. If you don't end this tonight, I will make sure his name is poison in this industry. And as for you, little sister, keep this up, and you can forget about any support from this family. No more connections, no more safety net. Choose." The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt every month of being ignored, every late night wondering what I had done wrong, crash over me again. But worse was watching Elena's trembling hands fold in her lap, her curvy frame suddenly fragile under the weight of the threat. She looked at me then, a long, heartbroken look that held every balcony conversation, every teasing smile, every quiet "I see you" we had given each other. I saw the war inside her. My chest tightened until breathing hurt. If you're sitting there feeling the same ache I felt in that moment, if this story is hitting somewhere personal, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It tells me these confessions matter, and if you've ever been forced to choose between love and family, drop a single word in the comments. Choose, I read everyone, because in that dining room, under that cruel, luminous daylight, I wasn't sure Elena could choose me, and I wasn't sure I could survive watching her walk away. Elena stood up, not dramatically. Not with the sharp, theatrical energy of someone who had rehearsed this moment. She simply set her napkin down on the table with quiet deliberateness, pushed her chair back, and rose to her full height. The emerald dress caught the light. Her long, dark, wavy hair fell over her fair shoulders. Her chin lifted, and she looked at Victoria with eyes that had stopped trembling. "No," she said one word, soft as a breath. Immovable as stone, Victoria blinked. "Elena," I said no. Elena's voice didn't rise, it didn't shake. It simply held its ground the way deep water holds its ground. Quietly, completely. "I'm not choosing, not the way you're framing it, because what you're offering isn't really family, Victoria. What you're offering is compliance, and I have given you compliance my entire life." The room was so still I could hear the distant sound of the city outside. Sunlight poured through the tall windows in full, luminous sheets, painting everything gold and honest and inescapable. Their mother made a soft sound. Something between a question and a grief. Elena turned to her, and the steels in her expression softened into something achingly tender. "Mama, I love you. I love this family. But I need you to hear me. Really hear me. For the first time in a very long time." She reached down and took my hand. I rose to stand beside her without thinking, without weighing it, without hesitation. My place was beside her. I think I had known that since a rainy Thursday evening when she had dripped rainwater on my hardwood floor and rearranged my entire world. "Yes," Elena said clearly. "This started as a plan. Lucas and I agreed to come here together to correct a story that Victoria had been telling about him. A story I knew was unfair because I know how she operates. I know because I have been on the other side of it too." She glanced briefly at her sister. "You are brilliant, Victoria. You are driven and capable, and I have admired you my whole life. But you are also someone who revises history when it becomes inconvenient. And I was tired of watching people get hurt by that revision without anyone saying a word." Victoria's jaw tightened. "So you decided to humiliate me in front of our parents?" "I decided," Elena said quietly, to stop being invisible. Something shifted in the room. I felt it, like a barometric change, like the moment after lightning when the air rearranges itself into something new. Their father, who had sat in silence at the head of the table throughout the entire confrontation, set down his fork very slowly. He was a tall, measured man with tired eyes that held decades of watching his two daughters orbit each other at a careful, painful distance. He looked at Elena, then at me, then at Victoria. "Is what she's saying true?" he asked Victoria, simply, without accusation but without escape either. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. Her perfect posture remained, but something underneath it gave way just slightly. The way a building shows its first crack not in the walls but in the ceiling, high up, where no one usually looks. "It's complicated," she finally said. "It isn't," I said. Every head turned to me. I hadn't planned to speak, but the words were already in my throat, warm and necessary. I spent 2 years giving everything I had to that company, to every project Victoria led. I was loyal and I worked hard, and when I finally recognized that my contributions weren't being acknowledged, that I was being used without being valued, I chose to leave with dignity. I paused. She didn't fire me. I walked away. And what hurt wasn't losing the job. What hurt was the silence afterward. 6 months of being erased by someone I had respected. I felt Elena's hand press firmly around mine. "I'm not here tonight for revenge," I continued. "I'm here because somewhere between the plan and the reality I fell in love with your daughter, your sister." I glanced at Elena, and the look on her face, open, luminous, undone, made my chest ache with something I had no adequate word for. "And I'd like to stay, if that means anything to anyone at this table." The silence stretched. Then their mother did something none of us expected. She began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically. Small, quiet tears that she pressed away with the corner of her napkin, her shoulders curved inward. She was a handsome woman with Elena's same dark hair, now threaded with silver, and she looked across the table at her youngest daughter with an expression of devastating recognition. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Elena, I didn't know you felt invisible." Elena's composure fractured, not completely, but enough. Her lower lip trembled, her eyes filled. "Mama, come here," her mother said, and Elena, for all her strength and steel and quiet immovability, crossed the room and bent into her mother's arms like a girl who had been waiting a very long time to be held. I looked away to give them the moment, and found myself looking at Victoria. She was still standing at the far end of the table, but everything about her had changed. The practiced smile was gone. The cold certainty was gone. What remained was something much younger and much more frightened. A woman who had built her identity on being the one who held everything together, now watching the architecture of that identity shift. She looked at me, and I saw it, the thing she would never say out loud, the apology that lived behind the pride. I gave her a single nod, not forgiveness entirely, not yet, but an acknowledgement, a door left open rather than slammed shut. Because I had learned, somewhere between 3 rehearsed meetings and 1 unplanned Italian restaurant dinner and a balcony at golden hour, that being the bigger person isn't weakness. It's the quietest form of strength there is. Victoria sat back down and said nothing more. We left an hour later when the dinner had dissolved into something softer. Quieter conversation, the gentle passing of tea, their father asking Elena about her current design projects with a genuine interest that made her face light up in a way I had never seen before. Small, but real. The beginning of something being rebuilt. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. The city glowed around us, streetlights beginning to bloom against a sky that had shifted from gold to deep violet. Elena walked beside me, her dark, wavy hair loose over the emerald dress, the silk catching the lamplight. We walked for half a block in comfortable silence. Then she stopped. I stopped beside her. She turned to face me on the pavement, the city moving quietly around us, and looked up at me with eyes that were still slightly red but completely clear. No performance, no strategy, just Elena, real warm and entirely present. "You said you fell in love with me," she said. "I did," I replied. "In front of my entire family, I did." She searched my face for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth lifted, slow, inevitable, devastating. "Lucas," she said softly. "Yeah, you remember that first night, when I showed up at your apartment soaking wet and whispered, 'Kiss me'?" My heart rate shifted. I remember every detail. She took one step closer, close enough that I could smell the chamomile and warmth of her, close enough to see the lamplight caught in the dark waves of her hair. She tilted her chin up just slightly. Her eyes dropped to my mouth for exactly 1 second before finding mine again. "I think," she whispered, "it's time to stop pretending." I didn't need another invitation. I cupped her face in both hands, carefully, the way you hold something you've waited a long time to hold, and kissed her. It was nothing like pretend. It was warm and real and full of every unspoken thing we had been building for weeks. Every teasing smile, every lingering touch, every quiet "I see you" exchanged over coffee cups and evening tea and shared silences. She leaned into me, her hand finding my lapel, and for a long moment the city simply fell away. When we finally pulled apart, her eyes were still closed. A single, luminous smile bloomed across her face, slow and certain and completely unguarded. "For the record," I murmured against her temple, "I think I fell in love with you the moment you looked at me and said, 'You're the only person in this story who actually got hurt.'" She laughed softly, and the sound of it, genuine and unrestrained and free, was the most beautiful thing I had heard in 6 months of silence. She opened her eyes. "So what happens now?" she asked. I took her hand, held it the way I had on the balcony, firmly, without hesitation, with every intention of not letting go. "Now," I said simply, "we stop pretending, and we start the real story." She squeezed my fingers, and we walked into the glowing city together. No script, no arrangement, no rehearsed answers. Just two people who had found each other in the wreckage of someone else's story and decided, quietly and completely, to write their own. If this story moved you, if Elena and Lucas made you feel something real, then please share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes the best stories find us exactly when we need them most. And if you've made it all the way to the end, subscribe, because there are so many more confessions like this one waiting for you. Thank you for being here. It means everything.